The first fence Lara Whitmore ever hated was built the summer she turned 16. She remembered the way the men worked from sunrise to dusk, hammering posts into earth that had once stretched open and wild. The sound of metal striking would echo across the prairie like gunfire. Her father had stood tall in the saddle, watching the progress with satisfaction as miles of barbed wire carved their ranch into sharp-edged borders. Land must be controlled, he had told her, or it will be taken. At the time, she had nodded. Now, at 22, she wasn't so sure. The Whitmore Ranch ruled the territory. Thousands of cattle grazed beneath the vast Wyoming sky, and her father's name carried weight in every saloon from here to Cheyenne. Men called him a visionary. Others called him ruthless. Lara simply called him Father. That morning, she rode alone along the northern boundary. The wind pressed against her back, warm and restless. Her chestnut mare moved steadily beneath her, hooves thudding softly against dry grass. That was when she saw it. A stretch of fence sagged low to the ground. She pulled the reins and dismounted slowly. The wire hadn't broken from age or weather. It had been cut clean and deliberate. The edges were sharp and fresh. Her pulse quickened. Beyond the fence, cattle wandered freely between properties, grazing on land her father had claimed only 3 years ago, land that had once belonged to smaller ranchers who'd mysteriously packed up and left. A sound came from behind her, the faint snip of metal. She spun. A man stood 20 yards down the line, crouched beside another fence post. His hat was pulled low, sleeves rolled up, hands steady as he worked a pair of cutters through the wire. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he straightened slowly. He wasn't what she expected. Not a reckless outlaw or drunken vandal. He stood tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair brushing his collar, and eyes that held something steady and unafraid. "You're on Whitmore land," Lara said firmly, resting her hand near the pistol at her hip. "Depends who you ask," the man replied evenly. His voice was calm, too calm for someone caught red-handed. "I'll ask you once," she continued. "What are you doing?" He glanced down at the severed wire, then back at her, fixing something that shouldn't have been built. Anger flared in her chest. "This fence marks property. It marks theft." The word hit harder than she expected. She lifted her chin. "My father bought this land after the water lines were blocked, after cattle starved, after families couldn't afford to fight him in court." His jaw tightened. Bought isn't always honest. The prairie seemed to go silent around them. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Albert Hayes." The name stirred faint memory. A small ranch near the creek. A widow and her son. Gone 3 winters ago. Her stomach tightened. "You'd better leave," she said, though her voice lacked the sharpness she intended. "If my father's riders find you here." "They won't," Albert said. "Not today." He stepped closer, not threatening, but unafraid. "You don't look like him," he added quietly. Her brows knit. "Like a Whitmore." She didn't know whether to be insulted. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you're not yelling for guards," he replied. She hated that he was right. The wind picked up, whipping strands of hair loose from her braid. Behind her, the cut fence sagged like a wound in the earth. "You think cutting wire changes anything?" she asked. Albert looked past her toward the horizon. "It reminds people the land isn't owned by fear." Her heartbeat felt loud in her ears. "You're risking your life. So did my mother when she tried to keep her ranch." Silence settled heavily between them. Lara glanced back toward the main house far in the distance. Smoke curled from the chimney. Power stood tall and unquestioned there. But here, on the boundary, things felt different. "Go," she said finally, though she didn't move to stop him. "Before I change my mind." Albert studied her for one long second. "I'll be back," he said. Then he tipped his hat and disappeared into the tall grass beyond the creek. Lara stood alone beside the broken fence. For the first time in her life, she wondered whether the Whitmore name protected her or trapped her. The broken fence was repaired before sunset. Her father rode out personally to inspect it, his expression dark beneath the brim of his hat. Ranch hands worked quickly, stretching new barbed wire between posts and hammering it tight. The metallic twang of tension snapping into place echoed across the field. Lara stood nearby, silent. "Someone's testing us," her father muttered. "Words spreading that we've gone soft." "We haven't," she replied evenly. He glanced at her. Softness is how men lose land. She held his gaze, but said nothing more. That night, sleep would not come. The moon hung bright and swollen over the prairie, casting pale silver over the fields. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Albert's steady expression, not angry, not reckless, just certain. Certain her father had stolen from him. The thought unsettled her more than the cut wire ever could. Before she could talk herself out of it, Lara slipped from the house, saddled her mare, and rode north. The prairie at night felt different, quieter, more honest. The wind moved gently through tall grass, and coyotes called faintly in the distance. She followed the fence line until she reached the creek, and he was there. Albert stood knee-deep in the water, washing dust from his hands. His horse grazed nearby. "You shouldn't be here," he said, without turning. "You say that like you own the night," she replied. He looked over his shoulder, faint amusement touching his features. "I don't own anything." The words carried more weight than humor. She dismounted and stepped closer. "Why keep coming back? They fix the fence every day, and I cut it every night. That's foolish. That's persistence." She crossed her arms. "You'll get shot." Probably. His calm acceptance unsettled her. "Why does this matter so much to you?" she pressed. Albert stepped out of the creek and faced her fully. The moonlight sharpened the lines of his face. "3 winters ago," he began, "my mother ran cattle on 30 acres just beyond this ridge. We shared the creek. Then one morning, Whitmore men posted new fence lines, claimed expanded property. My father bought that land," Lara insisted, though doubt crept into her tone. "He bought it after rerouting the creek upstream," Albert replied. "Our cattle couldn't reach water without crossing his fence. We lost half the herd before winter ended." Her throat tightened. "You could have fought it. With what money? What lawyers?" His jaw flexed. "When my mother refused to sell, your father's foreman threatened to charge her with trespassing on her own grazing path." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth. "She signed," Albert finished. "We left by spring." Lara felt something crack quietly inside her. She had heard whispers growing up, competitors disappearing, ranches folding overnight. She'd believed it was simply business. "Why not move on?" she asked softly. Albert studied her carefully. "Because if I move on, he wins, and he'll keep doing it to others." The weight of that truth pressed heavily between them. She stepped toward the fence line, running her fingers lightly along the barbed wire. "You think cutting this changes things. It reminds people they're not powerless." She turned to him. "And what about me?" He hesitated. "You're part of it," he said honestly. "But you don't look proud of it." Her chest tightened. "I didn't choose how this ranch was built." "No," he agreed. "But you choose what you do now." Silence lingered. From the distance, faint hoofbeats echoed. Albert's posture stiffened instantly. Riders. Lara's pulse jumped. Patrol, most likely. Without thinking, she grabbed his sleeve and pulled him toward the cottonwood trees lining the creek. They moved quickly, crouching low behind thick trunks, as 3 of her father's men rode past, lanterns swinging. "Spread out," one called. "He's been cutting near here." Lara's breath came shallow and fast. Albert stood close enough. She could feel the warmth radiating from him despite the cool night. The riders moved farther down the fence line. After several long moments, the prairie fell quiet again. "You just hid me from your own men," Albert murmured. She stepped back, unsettled by both the danger and the closeness. "I don't want bloodshed," she said firmly. "Neither do I." Their eyes locked in the dim light. For the first time, the boundary between them felt thinner than the wire stretched across the field. "Go home, Lara," Albert said gently, "before you're forced to choose." But as she mounted her horse and rode back toward the glowing lights of the Whitmore ranch, she realized something unsettling. She had already begun choosing. The prairie felt heavier the next morning. Lara sat at the long oak breakfast table while her father read reports from his foreman. His weathered hands flattened the paper, jaw tightening as he scanned the lines. "Another section cut," he said sharply. "Northridge, Clean work. Lara kept her gaze on her coffee. Maybe the wire's weak. Her father's eyes lifted slowly. Wire doesn't cut itself. Silence filled the room. He leaned back in his chair. I want double patrols at night. And if you see anything suspicious, you tell me. Of course, she replied, steady, but her pulse betrayed her. By afternoon, riders had been stationed at intervals along the boundary. Rifles rested across saddles. The message was clear. The Whitmore ranch would not be challenged. Yet, as the sun began to dip low, Lara felt the now familiar pull toward the north pasture. She tried to resist it. She failed. The sky burned gold and violet when she reached the fence line. The land beyond it looked deceptively peaceful rolling grass. Scattered wildflowers, the creek winding like a ribbon of silver. Albert stood by the broken section. Though tonight he wasn't cutting, he was waiting. You shouldn't have come, he said quietly. Neither should you. He studied her face carefully. They've increased patrols. I know. And yet you're here. She exhaled slowly. I needed to see it for myself. See what? She gestured to the land beyond the fence. What my father took? Albert didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward a nearby hill and motioned for her to follow. Together, they climbed until the ranch house appeared small in the distance. From up here, the fence lines looked unnatural, sharp grids cutting across what should have been open prairie. My mother used to say, "Land isn't owned," Albert said. "It's borrowed. You care for it while you're here. And my father believes control keeps it safe." Safe for who? The question hung between them. She thought of the men who tipped their hats to her father in Townsend, respectfully. Others fearfully. She thought of the families who had quietly disappeared. I don't know anymore, she admitted. Albert crouched and ran his fingers through the soil. This patch here, he said, used to be ours. We planted winter wheat near the creek bend. Lara knelt beside him. I was 12 when the first fence went up, he continued. I remember standing on the other side, watching your father's men stretch the wire. My mother told me not to hate them. Said, hate makes a man small. Do you hate us? She asked softly. Albert met her eyes. I hated what was done. I don't know you well enough to hate you. Her breath caught slightly at that. The wind shifted, brushing strands of hair across her cheek. Without thinking, Albert reached up and gently tucked them back. The touch lingered longer than it should have. Footsteps snapped them back to reality. 2 ranch hands rode into view below. They're closer than yesterday, Lara whispered. Albert's jaw tightened. They're hunting. She stood slowly, heart pounding, then stopped coming. No, you can't fight my father alone. I'm not alone, he said, as if on cue. Movement appeared along the far ridge. 3 riders she didn't recognize. Not Whitmore, men. Small ranchers, likely. They've started cutting too, Albert said. Not just me. Her pulse raced. If father sees that, he'll realize fear doesn't hold forever. A rifle shot cracked suddenly in the air. Dust kicked up near one of the distant riders. The patrol had seen them. Chaos erupted. The small ranchers scattered, galloping in opposite directions. Another shot rang out. Albert, go. Lara urged. Instead of fleeing, he grabbed the cutters from his saddle. What are you doing? She shouted. Ending this stretch, he rushed toward the fence line and clipped the wire with swift, decisive movements. The sharp snap echoed across the prairie like a declaration. Bullets struck the post inches away. Albert, Lara screamed. He finished the cut and turned just as riders charged toward them. Without thinking, Lara spurred her horse downhill, placing herself between the patrol and Albert. Stop, she shouted. The ranch hands reined in abruptly, stunned. Miss Whitmore, one said breathlessly. Move aside. No. Albert stood behind her, tense but unarmed. This land isn't under attack, she said firmly. It's under dispute. The men hesitated. Shooting past her was unthinkable. Her father's authority protected her even now. Return to the house, one rider insisted. I will, she replied calmly. Alone. The message was clear. The riders exchanged uneasy glances before slowly backing away. When they were gone, the prairie felt unnaturally quiet. You just defied your own men, Albert said softly. Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered them. I can't let this turn into blood. He stepped closer. You're crossing lines, Lara. She looked back at the fallen fence, lying useless in the grass. Maybe some lines need crossing. The sun dipped fully below the horizon, casting the land in shadow. But where the fence once stood, the prairie looked open, free. By morning, the entire ranch knew. Word spread faster than wildfire in dry grass. Miss Whitmore had been seen on the North Ridge. Miss Whitmore had stopped the patrol. Miss Whitmore had stood between a Whitmore rifle and the man cutting the wire. Lara felt the weight of every stare as she stepped onto the porch. Her father waited at the base of the stairs. He did not shout. That frightened her more. "Ride with me," he said. They saddled in silence and headed north. No patrols followed this time. No foreman. Just father and daughter riding toward the boundary that had begun to unravel. When they reached the ridge, the damage was plain. Several long stretches of fence lay in the grass. Posts leaned at awkward angles. Beyond the broken line, cattle grazed freely Whitmore stock, mingling with smaller herds from neighboring ranches. Her father surveyed the scene with cold calculation. "You know who's responsible," he said at last. "Yes. And you stood in my men's way." "I stood in front of a bullet." His jaw tightened. "For him, for what's right," she corrected. He turned sharply in his saddle. "Right? You speak of right as if you understand the cost of holding land." "I understand the cost of taking it." The words landed like a strike. For a long moment, he said nothing. "You think I built this ranch with cruelty?" he asked, voice low. "I think you built it with fear." The wind moved through the grass, whispering round them. "I did what was necessary," he said. "Out here, land is survival." "So is water," she replied. "So is fairness." His eyes hardened. "That boy filled your head with lies." "He filled it with truth." Silence stretched between them, years of loyalty, straining against a new fracture. Then movement caught her eye. Across the far ridge, riders gathered, not Whitmore men, small ranchers, families, farmers who had once kept their distance. And at their front rode Albert. He did not carry a weapon. He carried cutters. Her father saw them too. "Bold," he muttered. The riders descended slowly, deliberately, stopping just beyond rifle range. They didn't charge. They didn't threaten. They simply waited. Albert rode forward alone until he reached the broken line. He dismounted and stood facing Lara's father. "This land feeds more than one name," Albert called out clearly. Her father's horse shifted beneath him. "You're trespassing." "We were fenced out first," the other ranchers murmured in agreement. Lara felt her heartbeat in her throat. One wrong move, and blood would soak into this soil. Her father lifted his rifle, slightly not aiming, but reminding. Albert did not flinch. "You can shoot me," he said evenly, "but you can't shoot all of us." The unity behind him was undeniable. For the first time, Lara saw hesitation in her father's expression. Fear ruled when people stood alone. It weakened when they stood together. She nudged her horse forward until she was beside her father. "Look at them," she said quietly. "They're not thieves. They're neighbors. They're challenging my authority. They're asking for shared grazing." Her father's grip tightened on the rifle. "Shared land leads to chaos." "No," she said gently. "It leads to community." Albert stepped closer to the broken fence line and cut another remaining strand. The wire fell slack between the posts. No gunshot followed. The prairie held its breath. Her father slowly lowered the rifle. "You think I can simply surrender?" he asked her. "I think you can choose not to fight your own people." The words lingered. Behind Albert, families waited anxiously. Children sat on saddles beside parents. Cattle shifted lazily, unaware of human pride and history. Finally, her father exhaled. "I won't rebuild this section," he said, loudly enough for all to hear. For now, murmurs rippled through the gathered ranchers. Albert met Lara's gaze across the open space. Gratitude flickered there, but also caution. This was only a beginning. Her father turned his horse back toward the ranch house. "Temporary," he warned her quietly. "Do not mistake this for weakness." She watched the sun glint off the fallen wire. "It's not weakness," she said softly. "It's change." Behind them, ranchers dismounted and began removing more posts, not violently, but carefully, stacking them aside. The land opened inch by inch, and for the first time, the Whitmore Ranch did not stand alone on the prairie. The prairie looked different without the fence. It wasn't obvious at first glance. The grass still swayed in the wind. The creek still carved its quiet path through the land. Cattle still grazed beneath the vast Wyoming sky. But something unseen had shifted. Word spread quickly through town that the Whitmores had stepped back from the North Ridge. Some called it weakness. Others called it wisdom. Most simply watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Lara stood at the boundary at sunrise, boots planted where the tallest fence post once stood. Only a shallow hole remained in the earth, half filled with loose dirt and broken roots. Albert approached from the far side, leading his horse instead of riding it. "You're here early," he said softly. "So are you." He glanced around at the open stretch of land. "Your father surprised me." "He surprised me too." In the days following the standoff, negotiations had begun. Not heated shouting matches like Lara expected, but long, tense discussions around wooden tables. Grazing rights were redrawn, water access restored. Shared boundaries marked not by barbed wire, but by signed agreements, witnessed by neighboring ranchers. It wasn't perfect. Some land could not be returned, but no new fences went up. Albert stepped beside her, looking out over the pasture where cattle from multiple brands now mingled peacefully. "I didn't think it would happen like this," he admitted. "You expected a gunfight. I expected resistance, until someone fell." She folded her arms loosely. "So did I." The breeze lifted the edge of her coat, brushing against his sleeve. "You risked everything," he said. "Your father's trust, your position, your name." "My name isn't everything," she replied. "It never should have been." He studied her carefully. "And what now?" She considered the question. The Whitmore Ranch still stood strong. Her father remained powerful, but something in him had shifted as well. He had seen, perhaps for the first time, that power built entirely on fear could crumble when faced with unity. "He's not the villain you think," she said gently. Albert nodded slowly. "I don't think he's evil. I think he's afraid of losing control, of losing everything he built." They stood in silence for a moment. "Will you leave?" she asked quietly. Albert's gaze moved toward the distant hills. "I could start fresh somewhere else. By a small stretch of land, keep my head down. And would you be happy?" He didn't answer right away. Then he turned back to her. "No." The honesty in his voice warmed her more than the rising sun. "This land is part of you," she said. "It's part of us." The word lingered between them. From the ridge behind them, riders appeared, but not with rifles. Ranchers gathered casually, checking herds, exchanging nods across newly opened fields. The prairie no longer felt divided. Albert reached down and picked up a coil of discarded barbed wire lying near the grass. He weighed it in his hands for a moment, then tossed it aside. "Strange," he said. "Something so thin held so much power." It only held power because people feared crossing it. He stepped closer. "And you weren't afraid?" She smiled faintly. "I was terrified." "Then why did you do it?" She looked out at the horizon, where the land stretched endlessly, untouched by sharp lines. "Because I didn't want to inherit a legacy built on silence." His hand found hers warm, steady. "You changed more than the fence," he said quietly. "So did you—" Behind them, her father rode slowly along the ridge. He paused, watching the mingling cattle and neighboring ranchers moving freely across the shared land. Their eyes met from a distance. He gave a single, measured nod. Not approval, not surrender, but acceptance. Lara squeezed Albert's hand. The wind carried no sharp metallic hum, anymore only the sound of grass brushing against itself and cattle lowing in the open field. For the first time in years, the North pasture belonged to no single name. It belonged to the horizon. And, as Albert drew her gently into his arms, Lara realized something simple and certain. Like land, was never meant to be fenced. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories